From the hill country of Texas, this is One Radio Network. It's a little bit after 7 o'clock, 590 KLBJ Radio. Once again, this is Patrick Timpone. And from his office in Clute, Texas, Texas Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. It's nice to be with you.
Nice to talk to you. And congratulations on winning your seat back, or you never lost it, but regaining your seat.
Yes, well, thank you.
That was nice. And you've been spending some time in Galveston last few days.
That's right. We've been spending more time and more attention to Galveston lately, mainly because Galveston was the worst hit in the hurricane, and the 14th District, which is my district, is up and down the coast. So we had a lot of damage done, and getting it repaired and getting people happy again is not an easy job.
Pretty rough down there, though, still.
Yeah, they lost a lot of houses and a lot of infrastructure gone.
Uh-huh. I want to applaud you personally for your courage and focus on your bid for the White House and the primaries and on the debates. Looking back at that during that time, how did you feel when you ostensibly were being snickered at in some quarters and the media and the other people about you talking about the constitutional? Was that hard on you?
Well, I worried about myself because it didn't seem to bother me, and I thought, wow, you should be upset and you should be very annoyed. And, I felt confident that this was a small crowd that I was talking to in the audience. And, of course, I thought the other candidates weren't necessarily representing the many people that I was addressing. And therefore, I just thought, well, we'll see what happened. The first time or two, it was probably a little annoying, but then shortly after, I was reassured of my initial thought because we had a lot of emails come to us. Fundraising always picked up, and generally we won a lot of the post-debate polling. So
yes, you did.
I didn't worry too much about it.
Well, how do you feel then when you see these people so powerful that simply don't grasp the true meaning of the Constitution? You as an American.
Well, that annoys me, and I see it in philosophic terms, and I don't take it personally. I think, well, it's a real tragedy, and but I've been putting up with that for a long time. What they see is taking great political risk, even if I am correct, like voting by myself on a principle. They think that's just a disaster. Well, it turned out that it became a real asset because in the campaign, people who had not heard about me wondered about it, and then they would go and look up my voting record and say, well, this is strange, this is different. Not only do we hear the rhetoric, but he actually voted that way. Because, other candidates, talk somewhat similar to what I'm talking about, especially Republicans, they talk about balanced budgets and personal freedoms and limited government and all that. It's just that they never translate that into a strict interpretation of the Constitution and actually voting that way.
And they never do it. Talk about a constitutional or a conservative administration, but look at how the money supply has grown in the last 8 years under this administration.
Yeah, and it's not only that, it's the size of government. Spending goes up, which means that taxes, in spite of their talk, the taxes go up. Then the borrowing goes up tremendously, and then they still don't have enough because they're spending too much. Then they have to print the money. So we have all those issues, and they were actually worse in these last 8 years than they were in the previous 8 years under a Democrat.
Congressman Paul, did you feel like the nation would be better off financially in general with a McCain victory rather than an Obama victory?
I didn't think it made a whole lot of difference.
Uh-huh.
I think the rhetoric was slightly better on McCain, and if McCain had been elected, we would have hoped he would have stuck to his guns on taxes. But that in itself doesn't solve our problems. George Bush Sr. said the same thing. Then he changed his mind, and McCain didn't have a good record on taxes. But if they don't cut the spending, just because you don't raise taxes doesn't solve the problem, because I call spending a tax, because if you pass the debt on to the next generation by borrowing the money or you print the money, the tax comes out as higher prices. I mean, that's who, the poor and the middle class pay that tax. So it's, I didn't see any sincerity in the promise that government would get smaller under McCain. I saw too often the promise that one big part of the budget would never be challenged, and that is the many hundreds of billions of dollars we spend overseas just getting ourselves into trouble. So I never expected that to be cut.
Do you think that that's going to really change at all under President-elect Obama?
No, I think it'll be exactly the same.
Yeah.
But you know, if we wanted to take a little solace out of the whole thing, we could say once again the candidate who was perceived to be more for peace than war won the election. And I think the American people do vote for that. Remember how Wilson and Roosevelt had to promise to keep you out of war, and we're not for war, and how Nixon won to get us out of war, and Eisenhower wins to get us out of war. George Bush Jr. just won in 2000 by strongly criticizing Clinton for bombing Bosnia and also in Mogadishu and Somalia. So the anti-war candidate generally does win. So I think in that sense, it's a superficial victory. But both candidates are controlled by the same people, the military-industrial complex, the internationalists, and they want us around the world. And if you listen carefully to what Obama says, I mean, he was even ahead of McCain on sending more troops to Afghanistan. And when he talks about Iraq, he was on record saying, well, I'm going to have those troops back in 16 months. Well, that's not going to happen. He never said he'd close all the bases. So as long as we have a military presence there, we're still made more vulnerable by terrorist attacks.
Speaking of the powers to be, do you feel that the powers to be that would ever allow Ron Paul to become president of the United States of America?
Not under today's circumstances.
That's just not going to happen, is it?
There's no way. And that's
that's really spooky, Congressman, when you think about it.
Yeah, but that was my immediate reaction when people were hopeful when Palin was appointed and thinking, well, she's a good conservative and she is independent-minded, said a few nice things about me, and people say, oh, yeah, she's going to be okay. I said, but she cannot be picked for that position unless she fully endorses the foreign policy. Not only did she endorse that full foreign policy, she was wildly enthusiastic about McCain's foreign policy, and I think that's the only way it comes about. So if I would have gotten a little further along, I mean, they did a pretty good job on me anyway, marginalizing me and laughing and ridiculing.
I like the way you said that. Did a pretty good job on you.
But if I'd have gotten much further, believe me,
it could have got rough.
You wouldn't even call me again. You wouldn't even want to talk to me. You say,
really?
This guy is really bad.
Well, did that in a sense happen to Mr. Perot?
Yeah, I think to a large degree. I think
people say so, but it's just rumors, you know.
Yeah, I think so. They had to discredit him as well because he had a lot of money to compete with.
Right. Well, before we end up here tonight, we're going to talk about the future and where you're going to go and what you'd like to see done. But one last quick point on what's happening right now. They're talking already about stimulus package and helping with mortgage foreclosures and such. It's really important, I guess, for people to realize that we are broke, and we're going to get into it next segment. We are broke, and we don't have any money. So when you do this stuff, you're just deflating the dollar.
That's right. And
I mean, you're inflating the dollar, but you're deflating the value.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
And the politicians promise, and even today you hear a few people saying, well, Obama's promised a lot, but boy, he's going to have a tough time. But if he does, you're right, he's going to have to get the money printed. It's going to have to be inflationary. It has to be devaluation of the dollar.
And you've been around for a long time with this. What percentage would you hazard a guess that people understand that that's the way the game works as far as creating new money?
Well, you know, I think they understand it better outside of Washington. I think the average member of Congress doesn't have a lot of interest in it, and they sort of claim, I don't understand how the Federal Reserve works, and I think it's a convenience on their part because it takes their responsibility off them to deal with paying for this, and they know that if they vote for all these things, somehow or another the Fed takes care of it. You know, the money arrives. Just think in this recent bailout, even though we voted, I guess, for the 700, think how many trillions of dollars have been committed through just cranking it out from the Federal Reserve. And the founders would be aghast at this, to think that many dollars can be passed out, never going through the Congress at all, just by this secretive, unconstitutional central bank that just gives money away.
Well,